Hello, good afternoon. My name is Braňo Ondrášik, and thank you for joining us on this US election 2020 Amcham webinar. I'm broadcasting to you from home, and I expect most of you to be at home in the current situation. So in the past, Amcham has been organizing this well-known event during the pre-election season and during the election night. Unfortunately, today we can do it only as this setting is this virtual setting. And talking about the virtual setting, when you look at your screen, you can see at the left corner a Slido. There's a platform that we will be using to take your questions today and participate in our opinion polls. And before we start, actually, I have the first question for Paul, and that's about your expectations. So before you listen to our two guests, John Decker and Pavol Demeš, so you are not influenced, so to say, by them, where this is heading. So what's your expectations? Who will win the elections come next Tuesday? Will it be the Democratic candidate Joe Biden, or will it be the incumbent, the current president, Republican Donald Trump? Unfortunately, we could not be live with John. We actually have just recorded his presentation and a short Q&A session, and that was because the summertime change. So I will ask the directors to put on the recording that we had the Q&A with John Decker, the correspondent, the White House correspondent of Fox News Radio, and a journalist who has been covering the US elections for decades now. And we had a small chat with him just a few moments ago, so you can run the broadcast.
Okay.
Yeah. So joining us now from Washington, D.C. is John Decker. He's the White House correspondent of Fox News Radio, and he'll guide us through the U.S. elections and his models and his ideas and his experiences. John, so good morning.
Good morning and good afternoon to you, Braňo. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody at Amcham, Slovakia. Thank you to Peter and Susanna. And it's a real pleasure and honor to be with you. Unfortunately, I'm not with you in person. Hopefully we can do all of that in 2021, either in Washington or Bratislava. But in any case, what I want to do over the course of the next few minutes is to give you what I believe is where we are in the 2020 election and where we will likely be in 8 days, November the 3rd, which is when the U.S. presidential election takes place. As you may know already, I cover the White House for Fox News Radio, and also contribute to Fox Television. And I was right on the money in terms of my forecast for 2016, and I'm going to show you my forecast for 2020 as well. So why don't we begin with the slide presentation, which is not very lengthy, but it will give you a good sense about where I think the race stands as it is today. So let's move on to the next slide. Remind you where we started in this whole process. There were 16 candidates that were competing for the presidential election on the Democratic side. And why don't we go on to the next slide if we can. And as you may recall, Joe Biden was the front runner as this whole process began, but he did not win the first two contests that began. He lost actually in Iowa and in New Hampshire, and there were some that wrote him off that thought he was not going to be the nominee. In fact, Bernie Sanders won in those first two contests, and there were many people thinking Bernie Sanders was going to be the nominee. But ultimately, Joe Biden won in the state of South Carolina, the third contest in the process to choosing the Democratic presidential nominee. And that gave him so much momentum going forward in terms of winning the Democratic presidential nomination. Let's, if we can, go on to the next slide. Why don't you move it forward to the next slide, please? And move one more slide beyond that, if you can, please. Great. So let me talk to you a little bit about Donald Trump, President Donald Trump. He is the incumbent. And typically the incumbent has so many advantages. In fact, the last president to lose in terms of running for re-election as the incumbent was in 1992. George H.W. Bush lost to Bill Clinton. So you'd have to go all the way back to 1992 to find the last president that didn't win his re-election race. Of course, George W. Bush won his re-election race in 2004. Bill Clinton won his re-election race in 1996. In 2012, Barack Obama won his re-election race in 2012. So there are some built-in advantages in terms of being the incumbent, one of which is when you travel to these campaign spots in all these battleground states that we'll talk about, you travel on Air Force One if you're president, and that has a major impact in terms of the impact it has for voters in each of these battleground states. The other advantage is raising money, all of the campaign fundraising that's necessary to run for re-election and run for president. But interestingly enough, in this election cycle, Joe Biden has outperformed Donald Trump in terms of fundraising. In fact, in the month of August, Joe Biden outraised the Trump campaign by $154 million. That is very unusual, and that gives you a sense about the energy that exists on the Democratic side in trying to deny President Trump another term. Let's move on to the next slide if we can. These are the final results for the 2016 presidential election. And the reason why I put this slide together is because I think that in order to talk about 2020, you need to get a good sense about 2016. In 2016, you see that the number of electoral votes that are needed still exists today to win the presidency, 270 electoral votes. So it's really important to remember that in America, we do not choose our president by popular vote. We do not choose our president by which of these two candidates, Joe Biden or Donald Trump, received more votes than the other. The way we choose the presidency in the United States is based on the Electoral College, and the way that works is that each state, depending upon its population, is assigned a certain number of electoral votes. So, as you know, the most populous state in America is California. It has 55 electoral votes. Texas is the second most populous state. It has 38 electoral votes. And then both Florida and New York State have 29 electoral votes. Those are the next largest U.S. states. And it just goes on down the line to the point where you have some states that only have 3 electoral votes if they're the least populous. And so what you're trying to do if you're running for president is to cobble together enough states to get to 270. And in 2016, President Trump was able to do just that. He was able to go past 270 electoral votes. In fact, he got altogether 306 electoral votes, as this chart that you see next to me spells out. And the way that he was able to do that was that he broke through what is often called the blue line. And that is represented by 3 states in the northern part of the U.S., Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. These are 3 states that typically, over the last 4, 5, 6 election cycles, depending upon which state you're talking about, have voted for the Democrat who is the presidential nominee. So Pennsylvania, for instance, Pennsylvania has 20 electoral votes. In 2016, President Trump won the state of Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania had not voted for a Republican for president since 1988, since George H.W. Bush. So decades have gone by up until 2016 until a Republican won the state of Pennsylvania. And President Trump won Pennsylvania by less than 1 percentage point, barely won Pennsylvania. Also, what happened is that in the state of Michigan, President Trump won the state of Michigan, and Michigan also had not voted for a Republican for president for decades. And Michigan worth 16 electoral votes. And President Trump managed to break through, win the state of Michigan. In fact, he won Michigan by just 13,000 votes, less than 1%. And last April, I was at Amcham, Netherlands. I was in Amsterdam, and while I was in the Netherlands, I had lunch with the U.S. ambassador to the Netherlands, who formerly served as a U.S. congressman from Michigan, and he was in charge of the president's campaign in Michigan. And he told me over lunch, even he was surprised that the president won in the state of Michigan. So that was another important state the president won. And lastly, in 2016, the president managed to win the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin is worth 10 electoral votes, as you could see in that map that I had up just a moment ago. And Wisconsin had not voted for a Republican for president since 1984, since Ronald Reagan was president. And so President Trump managed to make some history in 2016. Those three states really accounted for the reason why he won the presidency. And in Wisconsin, one of the reasons why the president won there is because Hillary Clinton, for whatever reason, decided not to return to Wisconsin after she secured the Democratic presidential nomination. President Trump won Wisconsin by, again, less than 1 percentage point. And that was the difference maker. And you add these three states together, that accounts for the victory by President Trump in 2016. This slide that you see right here is a reminder that's very important, not to pay attention to those national polls that maybe you see or are following on a regular basis. The national polls are irrelevant, as this slide points out. Here you see Hillary Clinton actually received in 2016 more votes than Donald Trump. In fact, she received almost 3 million more votes than Donald Trump in 2016. And the reason being is because she performed exceptionally well in the state of California. In fact, this election cycle, I've looked at the most recent polling for California, and Joe Biden is ahead of Donald Trump in California by 25 points. It's pretty significant. And as a result, I think that what you're likely to see in 2020 is that Joe Biden will beat Donald Trump in terms of the popular vote, maybe by as much as 5 million votes or 7 million votes. But I have no doubt that Joe Biden will beat Donald Trump in the popular vote count. But again, important to reiterate this fact, that is not how we choose our president. So I want to bring up the final slide and spend some time here on this final slide here. This is the way that I view the electoral map today, 8 days before the presidential election. And I don't think anything's going to change in this electoral map between now and next Tuesday, November the 3rd. And so what you'll notice here is I've colored all the states that I believe Donald Trump will win in red. I've colored the states that I believe Joe Biden will win in blue. And there are 3 states that are colored gray. I haven't filled in those states, but I'm going to do so today. I'm going to fill in 2 out of those 3 states to give you a better sense in terms of where I think this race is today and where it will be 8 days from today. So it's important to tell you how I filled in this map. If you look at polling, for instance, in the state of Florida, and I've looked at it just moments ago prior to speaking with you, polling indicates an average of polls that Joe Biden is leading Donald Trump in the state of Florida, an average of polls by just 1.5%. And yet I've colored it in red. And the reason being is because I believe that Florida will lean Republican. Florida, I believe, is a state that leans Republican, not only because of what happened in 2016, but also because of what happened in the 2018 midterm elections. That's when a Republican ran statewide for governor in Florida, a Republican ran statewide for senator in Florida. Governor DeSantis, the Republican, won the state of Florida in 2018. Senator Scott won the state of Florida for Senate in 2018. And I think that this state ultimately leans Republican, and that's the reason why I colored it in red. I also colored in red North Carolina, which also indicates that Joe Biden right now, as we speak, is leading in North Carolina in terms of the average of polls. He's leading in North Carolina by just 1.2%. But I think that ultimately what you're seeing is a narrowing of the gap between Biden and Trump, and I've colored that state in red. Similarly, There are states like Arizona, which Joe Biden has visited often because he thinks that he can turn that particular state from red to blue. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that's a state that leans Republican, and that's the reason why I colored in that state, which accounts for 11 electoral votes in red. So that gives you a sense about why I did certain things here on this map. But now let's take a look at those 3 states that are colored gray. And it's the same 3 states that decided the 2020 presidential election. But as I said, I'm going to fill them in. I'm going to fill them in today because I believe that Joe Biden will win the state of Pennsylvania. And I also believe that Joe Biden will win the state of Michigan. And this means a lot. If you add those 2 states together to the total that I have right up there on that map, it brings Joe Biden to 268, Donald Trump at 260. And that means that for President Trump, he needs 10 electoral votes to win re-election to get to 270. And for Joe Biden, he just needs 2 electoral votes to get to 270. And you see that 1 state would be remaining the way I have this particular map, and that's the state of Wisconsin, worth 10 electoral votes. So if President Trump wins the state of Wisconsin, he would get to 270 electoral votes and he would win re-election. If Joe Biden wins the state of Wisconsin, he would be at 278 electoral votes, 8 more electoral votes that are needed to win the White House. This is how close I see this election ahead of the actual votes being cast. And by the way, there are a lot of votes that are already being cast right now. Over 50 million votes have been cast already through early voting and through mail-in balloting. And this is something that is different than past election cycles. We're going to see a record number of votes being cast by mail-in balloting this year, and that's because of the pandemic. And if you are wondering what are the main issues for voters, it's like it always is, the economy and jobs, always, no matter what country you're talking about. That's why that's what elections are often all about. And in addition to that, of course, the pandemic and how well the president has managed the pandemic, or for some voters, how poorly the president has managed the pandemic. So those are the 2 top issues. And then, of course, there are other issues that also are of a concern to voters, including, you probably read about it, saw video about it over the summer, the racial unrest here in America. But I maintain that America is so divided right now that most Americans, most of the American electorate, have already made up their minds. They're either going to vote for President Trump, and they're going to be really excited to do so, or they're going to vote essentially against President Trump. And they're excited about that as well. And the amount of money that Joe Biden has raised in this presidential campaign is indicative of how much excitement there is and energy there is in terms of trying to defeat President Trump. But I do believe, despite polling indicates Joe Biden is pulling away with this race, I don't think that's the case. I think America is just so divided, almost right down the middle, which is really remarkable when you think about it. There is a lot of energy on the president's side. His supporters are so excited but there's also so much excitement to deny President Trump a second 4-year term. And so you see how close this election is in terms of the electoral map that I've put up there. I could be wrong. I mean, I'm not infallible. I could be wrong in terms of my projection, but I do think that this is an accurate reflection about where this election will be on November the 3rd, which is a week from tomorrow. And so as it relates to the state of Wisconsin, I'll give you the current state of polling. Right now, according to an average of polls, Joe Biden is leading Donald Trump in the state of Wisconsin by just 4.6 percentage points. And that margin that Joe Biden has over Donald Trump has decreased over the past few months. Back in July, on July the 1st, the margin was 6.5%. So the margin seems to be decreasing. It's almost within the margin of error. And that state, if I was advising Donald Trump or if I was advising Joe Biden, I would say spend a lot of your time over the next 8 days in the state of Wisconsin, because that's the state that will decide this election. Now, you may ask yourself, how could one state decide an entire election? Well, it's happened in recent memory, in modern history, twice. It happened in 2004. The state of Ohio determined who won the White House. In 2004, George W. Bush won Ohio. In 2004, beating John Kerry. And of course, it happened in 2000, where the state of Florida was won by George W. Bush by just 537 votes. As a result, he got all of Florida's electoral votes and he won the presidency. And so, whereas it was Florida in 2000, Ohio in 2004, I believe it will be Wisconsin in 2020. And this is something that you should be prepared for. We may not know here in America, you may not know in Slovakia who will be the winner of the 2020 election right away, because there are so many mail-in ballots that need to be counted. They're paper ballots. They need to be counted. They need to be verified. The signatures need to be verified with what's on file. The barcodes need to be verified. It takes time. And I want to remind each of you what happened in 2000, and that is America and the rest of the world did not know who America's next president was until December the 13th, until 5 weeks after Election Day. So that's a clear possibility that we may not know right away who America's next president will be. So be prepared for that. And let me really quickly, because I think it's really important that I'm speaking to Amcham Slovakia, talk about what a Trump presidency would mean for Europe and what a Biden presidency would mean for Europe. I asked President Trump a few weeks ago, I interviewed him on Fox Television, and I asked him, will you mend fences with Europe if you win a second 4-year term? And typically he repeats a phrase like that back to me when I use it in a sentence, and he didn't this time. He said, I'm going to have the same policies that I employed in my first 4 years because they've worked for America. My economic policies have worked for America. My trade policies have worked for America. My tariff policies have worked for America. So I don't see any changes in terms of the way the U.S. deals with Europe, specifically if President Trump wins a second 4-year term. On the flip side, Joe Biden, I think, he's an internationalist, and he will return to the same type of approach that America had towards Europe during the Obama years. And that means that I think that Joe Biden would remove many, if not all, of the tariffs that we see have been put on place on European products, including imported steel and aluminum. So I believe that relations would improve if Joe Biden wins the presidency in just 8 days. Relations between the U.S. and the EU would improve quite a bit. And with that, I think I've got it right up to the point where I need to, and hopefully that gives you a good sense about where I believe the election is today. I could be wrong, but I was right in 2016, and I think I have a good feel based upon my model in terms of where things are right now. And that's the reason why you see Donald Trump and Joe Biden over the course of the next 8 days traveling all around these important battleground states that I mentioned, hoping to win them over. The president's going to be traveling to North Carolina and Florida and Pennsylvania and Ohio. Joe Biden's going to be doing the same thing, almost mirroring what Donald Trump is doing over the next 8 days, trying to hold on to that lead that he sees in the polling. Hopefully that gives you a good sense about everything, and I throw it back to you for the rest of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. This was definitely very interesting take and the model. So we have like a few more minutes that I can spend with you on a short Q&A. And
Sure.
First, I would like to ask you about the model itself. So you definitely said you based it on the opinion polls, and I just read yesterday in a Wire News story of another model, which has completely different approach, and it's by Dave Wasserman. He's a leading expert on house races.
Yes.
He says surveys from in competitive districts show a consistent swing of 8 to 10 percentage points away from Trump. Wasserman has also calculated what the national standing of Biden and Trump among key demographic groups, if it held across all the battleground states, would imply for the outcome like in the Reagan election, where Biden would be winning more than 400 electoral votes. And I mean, I know these models, these predictions are a bit of an alchemy, so we'll see. We'll definitely in 2016, where probably the one model, and I think the Los Angeles Times polling as well has been quite consistent on giving Donald Trump the edge. So how do you see this other model? Because this seems to be based on the House races, and your model, and what you base it from, except of the opinion polls as you see them standing right now.
Well, what we saw in 2016 is that the opinion polling really underestimated or undercount the amount of Trump support that's out there. And I think that's accurate. Opinion polling has become less accurate over the last few election cycles, and it's even more acute, more pronounced with President Trump. And that's the reason why if I was Joe Biden, I would not be secure or satisfied with a 2 percentage point lead or a 1.5 percentage point lead in an average of polling for any state, for Florida, for Pennsylvania, for Ohio, for Michigan. Fortunately for the former vice president, he has a more significant lead in the states of Pennsylvania and Michigan. And that's one of the reasons why I believe he's going to flip that state and turn it from red to blue. And so I am well aware of all of the other types of polling that's out there. I'm well aware of the model that you just cited, but they were wrong, unfortunately, for them in 2016. One of the individuals who is often cited for modeling is a person named Nate Silver. He has his own website, and he, I think, last week said that Joe Biden has a 91% chance of winning the presidency. I'm shocked by that number, and he was wrong in 2016. I'm not saying he's wrong again. And remember, it all comes down, in my belief, to the state of Wisconsin. But this is almost a 50-50 coin flip election. That's how close I think this election will be.
Well, it definitely proven to be the case in the last election cycle. So we'll see how it is 1 week from now. When we talk about the Electoral College and this special system the United States is having, already in 2000 there was a lot of discussion when Al Gore, the Democratic candidate, got more popular vote than George W. Bush, about reforming it. So maybe to guide us through, or to tell us here in Slovakia, which most of the people still think that the president is elected completely directly by the popular vote, that why it is the case that you choose the president in such a complicated matter, and where stands the discussion about the reforming the system of electoral college and moving in more to the popular vote area?
Well, the reason why America chooses our president in this manner is because it's mandated by the U.S. Constitution. So in order to change this manner of electing our president, you'd actually have to change the U.S. Constitution. And there have been amendments to the Constitution. That is possible, but it is a very complicated and long process. It's a big if, but if Joe Biden wins the popular vote by the number that I think, 5 million to 7 million votes, a larger margin than Hillary Clinton even won in 2016, but he loses the Electoral College, he loses the presidency, there are going to be a lot of calls, certainly by Democrats, to reform the system, to change the system. And that is certainly a possibility. I think, though, that the demographics are changing such that in America, if you look at certain states like Texas and Arizona in particular, those two states, which are red and have been red for so many election cycles, Texas for almost half a century, Arizona hasn't voted for a Democrat for president since 1996. Those two states, their demographics are changing such that they may be blue states in the next election cycle or the one after that, that maybe it won't even be necessary to change the manner in which we elect our president because of the fact that the demographics are changing to make those states more competitive for Democrats. So we'll have to wait and see. But again, if you're following this race with 8 days to go, and obviously all of you are, don't pay attention to the national polling. It's irrelevant. When I see a national poll that shows Joe Biden leading by 11 points, I look at it and I'm impressed by it in terms of how large the lead is. But a lot of that is because Joe Biden is leading by so much in California, and I discount them. And again, the reason being is because that's not important. That's not how Joe Biden, if he wins the presidency, will win the presidency. He'll win the presidency by getting to 270 electoral votes.
Exactly, and maybe not only in California, the Democratic states seems to be quite populous, like the New York State, for example, and some others. So this is definitely true. Maybe one final question, and you already touched upon this in your presentation just at the end of it, and that's the economy, the global economy, because we are here in the discussion for the Amcham Slovakia. So if you could define the Trump presidency and its impact internationally, especially on Europe and economically on Central and Eastern Europe, and elaborate a bit more on what you already said about Joe Biden if he gets elected. So what can we expect with regards to international trade, the global economy, and what was already done during the Trump presidency?
Well, like I said, if you are quite familiar, and I know all of you are, with the economic policies that existed during the Obama administration, many of them are going to return with the Biden administration in terms of the U.S. relationship with Europe. And you may recall during the waning years of the Obama administration, there was an effort to pass a multilateral trade deal involving Europe. Essentially, that idea was thrown away by President Trump. But Joe Biden, President Biden, the Biden-Harris administration may look to resuming talks on that multilateral deal if Joe Biden is elected president. And, you know, tariffs, obviously, that is one of those issues which has really, I think, hurt U.S.-European relations over the course of the past 4 years. I speak so often to the European Union ambassador to the U.S. I speak to Amchams, as you know, in Europe. And this is an issue that makes it that much more difficult for companies that are based in Europe to do business in America because of these trade tariffs. It makes it difficult to plan ahead when you have these tariffs in place. And I have no doubt, really, that Joe Biden will change these policies if he's elected president. Joe Biden has spoken about the need to partner with Europe, particularly as it relates to China. You know, the U.S. and Europe have so much power and so much economic clout if they partner together in terms of the economic threat that is posed by China. And do I think that Joe Biden would pursue that type of partnership? Absolutely. I have no doubt about that. Joe Biden is an internationalist. He is going to move forward with a program which will focus on improving American businesses. At the same time, we are in a global economy, and the former vice president recognizes that. And relations, as I said in my conclusion of my presentation, relations between the U.S. and the European Union will likely improve significantly if Joe Biden is elected president next Tuesday.
This was definitely a very interesting and inspiring discussion. We'll be watching eagerly 1 week from now here in Slovakia too, staying up early till the morning hours to see whether we will see actually the name of the president, if it's a new one or still the current one, Donald Trump. Jonathan Decker, thank you very much for joining us. Good morning to Washington, and this was really something to listen to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Branyo, and thank you again to Amcham Slovakia and everybody that was involved in putting this great event together. Let me ask you, if I may, I'll give you my private email address, and if any of you have any questions for me please feel free to email me. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions over the course of the next 8 days leading up to the presidential election. My email address is jon.decker@georgetown.edu. Georgetown as in Georgetown University. I'm an adjunct professor there. So I'd be more than happy to take any questions that you may pose my way and provide you with an answer in a relatively quick manner. So again, thank you so much, Branyo. This was a great opportunity to give you this presentation and give you a sense about where I think this election is today.
Thank you. And we are back in the live stream. And we have a second guest, and this is quite a well-known commentator of international issues. It's Pavol Demeš, an independent foreign policy analyst, who is joining us from home, I guess, too.
Hi, Brano. Yes, I'm at Dlhé diely, or Longital, as used to be called with housing development.
Yes, and I'm in Petržalka. But before we start the conversation together, I would like to ask to show us the results of the first snap poll we did. So as you can see, the expectations of our watchers, despite the fact that John is seeing it very close, 74% of our watchers thinks that Joe Biden will win the elections on Tuesday, and we'll be having a new poll which you can be voting in while Pavol is presenting, and it will be, who would you like to win? If you would be an American citizen, would you vote for Joe Biden or for Donald Trump? So that's the second poll. And we can now start with your analysis and your presentation. Pavol, so the floor is yours.
Thanks, Branyo. I'm really very happy that Amcham is doing this event and allowing us to be connected from our homes, which just indicates how very unusual situation we are living. But it's very good that tradition of Amcham's pre-election event will be remembered, and let's hope that next one will be celebrated or held in situation like before at Carlton Hotel or some other place here in Bratislava. Also, I'm very glad that John was giving us his take on this complicated electoral system, and not only complicated electoral system, but rather crossroads situation in these elections, since we are dealing with two completely different candidates, two starkly different vision of governance. So in my presentation, which will not be accompanied by slides, I will try to freely tell you a few things, how I see US elections from place where I sit. And I must tell you that I'm watching these elections in last 30 years with great interest, because usually they are telling a lot about life in the United States, but also telling a lot about general situation around the world, since I doubt that there are any other elections which are watched so closely, the US presidential one, since the United States is still country which is defining on global arena so many things in various areas. John was giving us also his prediction based on his model, indicating that we are still in very unusual, in uncertain situation where we can expect either candidate to win. And those gray states, which he was pointing to, for us Europeans, it is almost difficult to understand how and why Americans are voting this way. But we will see whether his model will work at this time or not. I think that context of this year's presidential elections in the United States could be marked by huge uncertainty globally, which was created by COVID-19 pandemic. I think that the United States, similar like Slovakia or any country around the world, is dealing with this completely unexpected situation, which we people around the world thought will never hit us. We lived in this illusion of globalization, growth, from time to time some disturbances related to local conflicts or local problems, but COVID basically united us, and all mankind 75 years after UN was created is tested from the point of view of cohesion, and the whole international system is tested by this pandemic situation. I think that uncertainty and polarization is not only typical for the United States, but practically for every single country, and particularly for transatlantic community. I think that the United States could be almost a test case how it dealt with COVID, which I will come to in a minute. But before that, few things for me, which are for me very unusual for these elections and were not mentioned by John. Two candidates, Donald Trump 74 and Joe Biden will be next month 78. Never in history of the United States finalists were so old. It is almost difficult to understand why America is unable to produce younger, more dynamic candidates. But this is just an observation, and surely there must be some reasons why these two candidates, Republican Trump and Democrat Biden, resonate in country which is so dynamic and changing so many things internationally. Second, America has changed profoundly. Those of us who are watching it in the last 3 decades, usually we were not so surprised by performance of in White House, whether candidate or president was Republican or Democrat. Usually the system of checks and balances worked. Republicans and Democrats controlled each other. But at this time, America is a highly divided country, highly polarized, and many issues which were also almost forgotten, like racial tension and accusations and conflicts, crime rate increased, and so on. This is the period in which elections are taking place. Also, I think that Donald Trump in the last 4 years changed so many taboos which were associated with American president. A, how he speaks, B, how he communicates, and how he handles office. If you look at his method of communication via tweets, which became so notoriously known and are putting into alert not only people in the United States, but also internationally, not knowing where the most powerful politician in the world sort of was thinking about what he's tweeting in the morning and how and what he's doing with these tweets, dealing with personal issues, dealing with international issues, fighting with political opponents, fighting with media. I think it was most unusual performance of president we ever seen. Also, I think that Donald Trump was notoriously known for changing people. During his presidency, this is the 6th national security advisor. We have 2nd Secretary of Defense. We have 2nd State Secretary. Diplomats, who usually are quite stable element in American politics, I think were changed so profoundly, and many things in the world of American diplomacy is difficult to understand and read. COVID-19, I think that if there wouldn't be COVID, Donald Trump would most likely win these elections, because economy before COVID hit the United States was doing quite well. Donald Trump was popular, and also Democrats were unable to find more dynamic, again coming back to age, younger guy who would be able to confront Donald Trump. So Democrats at the end came out with their candidate, but if there wouldn't be COVID, most likely for Donald Trump, this would be easy re-election, whatever we in Europe can be critical of him and his performance. But COVID, which was labeled at the beginning by, I think Donald Trump just simply mishandled a pandemic, and how he dealt with it, I think will be probably the biggest challenge for him to overcome in his attempt to win the office. Because America became the first in casualties, over 220,000 dead of infection, which Donald Trump at the beginnings downplayed as episodic infection, which will disappear. His own city, New York, turned into, as he labeled it, ghost city, with a lot of troubles after New York was hit by COVID pandemic. Also, I think economic downturn in the United States in this year, over 30%, growing unemployment, tensions of all kinds, I think are creating results of this pandemic and handling it. And also how Donald Trump was dealing with scientific community and medical community. I think for many of us, it is difficult to understand that this could happen in country which has the largest number of Nobel Prizes for medicine and economy and all kinds of other things. I think that it is difficult to understand that he could get along with this type of handling of pandemic, which all of us were watching with great surprise. I think that watching two presidential debates, because third one was cancelled because of COVID infection of President Trump, one could say that these were also not very elegant debates. Particularly first one was full of tensions, accusations, and it was just simply difficult to watch and have joy as observer of political or electoral process. Second presidential debate, which took place 2 or 3 days ago, was much better because organizers decided to mute opponents, not to jump each other into their 2 minutes. And also, I think that we could see from the second presidential debate televised, also that these are 2 very different personalities with very different take on how they will handle economy, how they will handle pandemic, and how they will handle international relations. I think it was more than obvious that Donald Trump, with his rhetoric, just quoting that I am the second, free quote, I am after Abraham Lincoln, second best president in the history of the United States, it was quite something. Also, how he was dealing with issues of race and several others, I think that it was very complicated to understand that he can get along still with this type of rhetoric in the United States. I think that, as John mentioned in his presentation, that we are going to see also profound change. I mean, 2 candidates differ profoundly on international relations. I think based on this presidential debate, but also from various other articles, analyses written about the two candidates, we can see that Donald Trump is not regretting anything in foreign policy. He will continue his line, strengthening America first, attitudes, showing tough hand, and these negotiating things, what works, this transactional attitude, what he showed as former successful businessman. Joe Biden will try to return US back to this more multilateral and leadership role, particularly leadership in the democratic world. Joe Biden indicated that he will sign Paris climate document, which Donald Trump just abolished. Transatlantic relations, I think, again confirming what John was telling, would be different if Joe Biden is re-elected, if Joe Biden is elected. And I think that overall, based on voting, which I saw already, that what people who are on this call think that Joe Biden will win, surely for us watching particularly this popular support, it is obvious that a couple days before elections, Joe Biden is leading. And I think that most Europeans, I think if they would vote for Joe Biden because of this issue of relations between United States and European Union. I think that also what I haven't mentioned is big theme of these elections is relations between United States and China. China, which handled COVID completely differently and is having now economic growth, similar like several other Asian countries. I think that we in a transatlantic community will be watching results of these elections very carefully, because their implications not only for transatlantic relations but for international order are at stake with these elections. And I would stop here.
So thank you for a summary of the whole campaign, of the candidates, on what's going on, Pavol. And I will move this a little bit now to discussing some of the foreign policy aspects. You still have time to post questions. Unfortunately, I cannot put questions to John. Some of them are towards him, but if you have a question for Pavol or for me even, I will answer those questions. I see Chris is writing here, as a US citizen, I can tell you that the reporter showed a clear bias in support of Biden. His model had many questionable assumptions. I'm not sure whether you meant he was biased in a negative or positive way of support of Biden. So maybe if you want to clarify, I will make it clear. And let's move it to discuss this. I think I still love you some time to vote. We can see the results of your voting. Who would you like to see as the US president at the end of this debate? So, Pavol, you are an expert in foreign policy. You've been in the government dealing with the foreign policy, so you know something about the global relations. So from the international perspective, how did the global politics change due to the Trump presidency? And in specific focus, I would like to know how it affected the Central Eastern European region and even Slovakia.
Yeah, thanks. I think that United States within Donald Trump presidency decreased very significantly its leadership role in the world, which Donald Trump just indicated as at the beginning, that he will focus mostly on what's going on in the United States, what is good for America. And I think that political weight on global stage, political weight of the United States on global stage decreased very significantly. surely relations between China, which is growing economically and technologically, innovation within China, and competition between China and the United States occupied tremendously American political system. Also, attitude of Donald Trump towards Russia has changed profoundly in comparison with previous administration. I think that Donald Trump specifically mentioned that Vladimir Putin is my friend, which caused a lot of disturbances within transatlantic alliance and NATO in particular, because Russia in last couple of years became more assertive and influential in Europe, and all European, all EU states are redefining their strategic documents based on behavior of Russia and its hybrid warfare. And in this situation, if American president says that Vladimir Putin is his friend, sometimes it is difficult to understand what he means by friend. Also, North Korean dictator was labeled by him as friend. Again, notion of friend defined by Webster dictionary is probably different than what he means when he labels some of the political leaders friend. And also, I think that one has to admit that Donald Trump didn't play a bad role within NATO, where many people were worried, but by him pressing allies in Europe to increase spending in defense, played important role, also putting some deterrence on eastern flank of NATO was appreciated. Visit of Donald Trump to Poland and stressing his interest in Central Europe. Visit of State Secretary Mike Pompeo to the region, not only recent one, but last year when he visited also Slovakia, just shows that original fear that they will just simply forget Central Europe didn't materialize. And I think that in these NATO relations, relations within NATO, it was not so complicated as was expected. I think that Central Europe nowadays, which is also suffering of COVID, all of us are preoccupied, and we see that we are becoming part of fabric of European Union with all rescue packages and all kinds of funds which our countries require. I think that we, in last 4 years, started to rely more and more on Europe. And I think that this is something what has its pluses and minuses, but I think that Slovaks and Central Europeans are now turning more towards European Union with assistance and so on. I think that last thing what also needs to be said about Donald Trump is his attitudes towards multilateral institutions, not only departing from climate accord, but also World Health Organization was punished by him. Now he is critical of basically all multilateral institutions, which surely were quite lost when pandemic hit the world. But on the one would expect that he will try to look at joint efforts in dealing with these outstanding issues which all humankind is confronted. So from this point of view, I think that last public opinion polls, when Slovaks were asked whether they believe in US leadership versus what's their attitude in leadership of the United States and Russia, surprisingly enough, most Slovaks believe in Russian leadership, even if we are not members of any groupings with this country. then with the United States, popularity of Vladimir Putin is higher than popularity of Donald Trump. So I think that public diplomacy and understanding of the United States decreased very significantly in spite of many links what we have in business, universities, innovations, and so on. I think that we are a little bit losing hearts and minds of people in believing in the role of US as dominant player within transatlantic family.
Exactly, and you mentioned at one point was the definition of a friend by Donald Trump, and I believe he said that he's even in love with Kim Jong-un. So he sometimes uses the terms that we cannot say what he's actually meaning with that. But the question is, can these relations, these transatlantic relations, these US-European relations be repaired in any forthcoming Trump presidency, and vice versa with Joe Biden? I think the issue of trust might be quite significant even with him as a president.
Yeah, I think that there are numerous conferences, meetings, several publications were already written on how to restore transatlantic relations, how to fix some broken relations, and so on. So we intuitively feel that relations between United States and Europe, particularly European Union, or European Union in particular, of which we are part of. By the way, whenever we speak about these friends, Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage are considered to be very good friends of Donald Trump, which I think that at time of Brexit, when we are struggling whether these will be normal Brexit or negotiations or hard Brexit and so on, so Donald Trump, with high degree of insensitivity, was also dealing with this Brexit issue, which is causing so much headache for everybody within European family. So I think that in case of victory of Donald Trump, I think we know by now what we are having. He is clear on not changing his attitudes and steps. This was also mentioned by John. I think that we surely would have to calculate it into our policy. European Union, after departure of Britain, and if Trump wins, will have to galvanize more and divide the roles and find its own way how to boost self-esteem and position within global economy, within global affairs. European Union is still strong enough and powerful enough, even if we are weakened by all these turbulences which we have been discussing. We would need to deal with the US as it is, not as we would wish. In case of victory of Joe Biden, I think that he will try to heal domestic divide and attitude of Americans towards Europe, and highlighting importance of Europe and European Union in US global affairs, because there is no one closer to the United States than European Union. I think that this competition with China and Russia and other actors on global arena, if US wants to make it and benefit also out of that, we are not speaking about charity. I think that under Joe Biden, we could see revitalization, and as Americans love to call this, reset of relations with European Union, which I think is of utmost importance and vital interest both for the United States and Europe, because if we look at economic, trade issues, scientific innovation, and so on, I think that US can rely on EU much more than on China or other partners with which they will be in competitive relations. So I think that one way or another, we can't think of alternatives but rather do within given circumstances of utmost and work on it that transatlantic relations will be kept and strengthened in period of overcoming economic downturn and trust in democratic model, which we are seeing both in the United States and in Europe.
Thank you. So we'll now turn to the question from the audience. Chris opined, and he meant that the reporter from the Fox News Radio was in clear support of Biden. So I wanted to make that clear. So there are a few economic questions. So I'm not sure, Pavel, if you want to answer them or you can opine about them. One is from Adam. Do you think the US will leave the World Trade Organization? In Slovakia, we are dependent on open global market. Current president is making obstacles. Well, I would say, as you mentioned, he left the Paris Accord, he left the World Health Organization. So I don't think there's anything stands in a way that he maybe decides to leave the WTO. What do you think, Pavol?
Yeah, I would agree with this. I think that Donald Trump is on the path of disconnecting as much as possible he can with these, for him, complicated multilateral relations. He is in front of bilateral relations where he knows exactly who is sitting next to him, with whom he can negotiate and win. He is getting nervous whenever he has too many players and variable geometry in negotiations. I think that it makes him uncertain and impatient.
Yeah, and from the other side, Pavol asks another question related to trade. So do you think in case of Biden's victory, we can expect a revival of a transatlantic trade and investment partnership? You remember that was a big deal of a debate ahead of the 2016 election about TTIP. So yeah. You have an opinion on this?
Yeah, I think that answer is yes. I believe that it will be in the interest of the United States, which is economically very weakened by this COVID pandemic situation, to work on recovery. I would say that first on rescuing and then recovery, because we are not there yet at all in European Union. We are not there at all in the United States, that we can think about recovery or call it post-COVID period. We are in heavy COVID period, and what we are doing with now is to dealing with pandemic and rescue our citizens. That is why we have also this conference call. We can't meet each other. And economic downturn will be typical for every single European country, and it will be and is very pronounced in the United States. So for that reason, I think that collective thinking and collective help, how to overcome that economic and social downturn after COVID-19, I think will be top priority, and helping each other. I would suggest that it would be necessity. It will not be philosophical question, but very, very pragmatic, how not to further deteriorate social standards in our countries, which may then lead to a lot of unrests, which we are seeing in both in the United States and in Europe. Now all kinds of nervousness, what we see, and strikes and against. So we saw first water cannons in front of government building, where people angry with government steps were doing during lockdown period. Or I think that what we see also in Western Europe, in Germany and France, where people are protesting against governmental measures. We saw a lot of unrest in the United States. So I think that we are not there yet that we could speak about post-COVID situation. So for that reason, I think that my feeling is that it will be in vital interest, both in the United States and in Europe, to help each other and ease all kinds of restrictions and measures for transatlantic economic cooperation and cooperation in health and other areas to rescue our respective countries and rescue transatlantic ties.
Yeah, and I think Ronald Blaško, he asks a question, what would the new or the incumbent president mean for the Central and Eastern European region? I think we addressed this in the questions already, all overall in the transatlantic relations. This is something a bit more to the economy. Again, what are your perspectives of the development of the 3C initiative and PTEC? That would be the energy cooperation here in Europe and as well transatlantic one. During possible Biden's presidency, recently 3Cs have been more dynamic projects. So how do you believe will the cooperation here in Europe and with the United States of America on energy sector be fostered, bolstered with the Biden or Trump?
Yeah, I think that this 3C initiative was one of the projects which caught attention of Donald Trump, and I think that originally people were rather skeptical when Poland, which is lead country in this initiative, came out with that because, as you know, we have all kinds of other groupings which are dealing with energy issues and EU Energy Union and all kinds of other projects. We thought that this is just Polish project which will not get too much ground for further development, but I think that in the end, since it was backed by the United States, it got more attention, and all this north-south direction in cooperation in economy, generally, not only in energy, I think surely would be appreciated because it would bring more players also from Southern Europe on board. It may still fly, but we will see. I think that this configuration of economic cooperation after COVID will show viability of this, but surely some of the projects, energy projects, when LNG from the United States would help with energy here in Europe, is just, I think, important moment where US is looking how to cooperate also with this part of the world, not only with Western Europe. But energy, as we saw, was tested also now, this Nord Stream 2, with Navalny's poisoning. It opened up again how important diversification of energy resources are, that when EU was putting sanctions after Navalny was poisoned, some people even argued that it is only about 150 kilometers to build the underwater pipeline, that it should be stopped because of. So whenever we speak about energy, I think that it has a lot of political meaning in it. And I think that if we would be able to keep US economic interest, not only through military cooperation and all kinds of other innovative companies which are playing a role in our economy. I was quite amazed. I had Gabriel Galgotzi in my program last Thursday, that how big Amcham is and how many members, which are not only American companies, but many local and European. I think that all this ecosystem of companies which are dealing with economy, not only with energy, which are keeping interest of the United States in our region, just should be welcomed.
Yeah, exactly. And we have only a few more minutes, so maybe just to go through it really, really quickly. These are more related to the internal U.S. politics. So one is about a thing that is happening just today in the United States Senate, the confirmation of the new conservative justice to the bench, Justice Barrett. And the question is, can a new Supreme Court justice affect the result of the elections? We know in 2000 it was decided by the Supreme Court, basically. So I guess so that the new majority that has taken place in the Supreme Court can very well decide the outcome of the election. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it is quite remarkable that this election of members of Supreme Court is so high on minds of Americans. For us in Europe, whenever these type of debates are going on, it is not something what broad public would be interested in. When Pew did these public opinion polls a few months ago, what are key issues for Americans which will be playing role in their decision whom to vote, or which are among top concerns, I think that election of Supreme Court justice was among top 5. So it's very high on agenda, because people in the United States know that Supreme Court is very important institutions which has profound impact on rule of law in the country, and which has profound impact also on politics. I think that one of the issues which we haven't mentioned is that Donald Trump, in first televised debate with Joe Biden, mentioned that he may have difficulty to confirm results of elections if they will not be free and fair.
I wanted to add, actually, you are replying to a question that is connected to the Supreme Court, and that's by Michal Kečmeri, and he asks, President Trump has not ruled out the possibility of not accepting the results in case of tide laws. Can you imagine the practical implication of such an act?
Yeah, so I think that, yes, just first of all, it is quite striking that President can mention something like questioning the whole own electoral system and accepting something so clear that it just shows nervousness within political campaigning, and that is why one cannot rule out that courts will play very important role in fixing some of these difficult moments in the US electoral and particularly post-electoral time, just to see that elections will be labeled that they are standard, normal. We know countries in Central and Eastern Europe when elections are not labeled as standard and then democratic, but having United States questioning credibility of electoral process, I think is something unusual. So for that reason, courts may be very important in helping to fix some of this post-electoral situation where we will not know immediately after November 3rd. Like usually in our countries, we know through exit polls and so on immediately who is winner, but we should be ready for some surprises of not knowing for some time who actually is winner of this race for the White House.
Yeah, well, incredible times we're living in, right? Nothing seems to be normal, or we have a new normal in many areas. So just really briefly, we have only like 2-3 minutes left, and the final question from the audience. So if you could put it in 1 minute. If Biden wins the White House, is it going to decrease the divide currently present in the US society, and is he going to decrease it? And if yes, how?
I think that key issue for Biden would be to heal this huge divide within American society and to bring somehow Americans closer to each other in helping each other to overcoming complicated social, health, and economic situation. I think that these would be his absolutely primary goal. All these foreign policy issues, surely we as foreigners, who are not voting, but know how important the result is, I think a secondary thing. Foreign policy of US will be done in the United States, how Americans will start trusting each other more, how they will trust more their democratic system, and through their engagement in global affairs, show their interest globally. And besides being economic, military superpower, technological and innovation superpower, I wish that America would become again moral superpower, which is leading through example. And I think that this will be the biggest test for Joe Biden if he makes it.
It has been a remarkable campaign, a remarkable presidency, the remarkable 4 years, the final year. And you mentioned the age of both of the candidates, which are almost nearing 80s. So that's kind of a new thing in the US election, since Bill Clinton, George Bush, even Barack Obama, they all were in the 40s when they were elected the president. Mm-hmm. So Donald Trump and Joe Biden, they're quite new on this one for the last few election cycles. Thank you very much for your time, Pavol. Very interesting opinions and analysis of what we might see and what we have seen for the last 4 years. Before we go, I would like to see the result, to show us the results of the snap poll, of the second snap poll we had. So maybe you can show it to us. And it is, it's the prohibited number, 88%. Mm-hmm. 88% would like to see Joe Biden to win next Tuesday. So this wishes correlate a little bit with their expectations. So we'll see whether that will be the case. I would like to thank as well our partners for this live stream, and that's Cisco and IBM. Thanks a lot for supporting Amcham and as well this live stream. Thank you very much to John Decker, who joined us from Washington, D.C. to discuss the U.S. elections. And thank you very much, Pavol Demeš, a foreign policy analyst, joining us from Dlhé diely in Bratislava. And to everyone in the audience today, hope this was an interesting 90 minutes for you to listen to and to see us. Hope we made a little bit nicer day for you today, albeit some kind of hard topics we were discussing. We'll be all waiting next Tuesday. We'll see how it will end up. So thank you very much for spending your time with us. Thank you very much, Pavol. Have a nice day.
Thank you very much. Stay healthy.
Thank you.